Hey, how's it going? Keith Morgan here for TechTyro.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to texture the rest of the apartment building that we have started here. So this is now part 4, I believe, of our custom set extension tutorial. So in the last tutorial, I showed you how to make the textures for the windows. And in this tutorial, we're going to show you how to actually build the nodes for those materials as well as the materials for the rest of the model. So with that, let us dig right in. So we're going to go ahead and do the easy materials first, that being the brown paint and the shiny metal, just because those can be done procedurally without any image textures. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to go to our World tab, and we're going to click Use Nodes, and we're going to, under the color here, we're just going to click this little tab, choose Environment Texture, and hit Open, and we'll go and navigate. And I just went and grabbed a environment map, texture off Flickr, and equal rectangular, all good. So now if we go into rendered viewport, we can see what that looks like. So you can see the scene is now being lit with the image, which is what we want for this. And this won't necessarily be the image we use for the final, as we'll be putting it on footage, but we'll be using an image similar to this to fake reflections on the windows later. And then we'll adjust the lighting as such, but that'll be the next tutorial. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and start building the metal and paint materials. So we'll start with the brown paint. So I'm just going to go over here to our timeline and change it to a node editor. And make sure you click this little button down here for materials, and then you'll be able to see the nodes for the actual materials. So I'm just going to zoom in here on the door area so we can see what we're doing. And this will be a pretty simple material, and I'm not going to put a lot of detail into it because it is going to be so far away in the final render, but if you wanted to actually put an image texture on there, by all means you could unwrap that. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit Shift-A to bring up the add menu, and we're going to add a shader, mix shader, drop it in on there, and then we're also going to add a shader, glossy shader. So then we'll plug that into the bottom of the mix shader, and you can see that kind of got glossy, go figure. So we're actually not going to give the glossy a color, we're just going to give the diffuse a color, and we're going to choose, we'll choose this viewport brown that we have just as a starting place, and we'll tweak it from there, so we'll make it a bit darker maybe. Yeah, that's looking a bit too glossy, so on the mix shader we'll just knock that down a bit, and we'll just zoom in so we can see what we're doing. And like I said, this is a minor detail, so you don't have to spend a lot of time making it look exactly right, but if you want, by all means. So I'm just going to go to HSV here. That's a hue saturation value, just another way to select colors. And I'm just going to boost the, just zoom in here so you guys can see what's going on. I'm going to boost the saturation a bit, just to make it a little more orangey brown as opposed to just gray brown. And yeah, that looks about right. And for this mix shader, 0.2 is still too glossy, just slightly, so maybe like 0.1. Yeah, something. That'll help bring out the diffuse color a bit too. Like I said, minor detail, you probably won't even notice it all that much. So that's that material made. And if you want the door a little more shiny, you could just put the roughness down and it'll reflect a slightly more crisp. If we put it right to 0, you'll get perfect reflections, but you don't want that, obviously. 0.1 or 0.2, somewhere in there, something. Okay, so that's done, and if we're all set, you can see it also applied it to our escape doors upstairs, so that's good. So next we can do the shiny metal. Now this one's even simpler. We'll just delete the diffuse node there, and we'll add a shader, glossy shader. I'll put that into the surface, and if we come up here, you can see that is, oh, shiny metal. Put the roughness down a bit, just so it looks a little more metallic and clean, And well, there you have it. There's our metal. Pretty fancy. Alrighty, so we have those done. So I'm just gonna hit ZZ to go toggle the wireframe and then go to solid just so we can get around. And we're gonna do the concrete first, just because it's the bricks will have a little more high maintenance to them because we'll have to scale them a little more precisely than we will the concrete. Concrete, you know, is well, it's concrete. It could have a few different aesthetics depending on how it's made, I suppose. So you can kind of fudge the size on that, but the bricks you'll want to get pretty much the exact size that you'd expect a brick to be. Otherwise, it'll just look like you either have too many bricks or not enough bricks. So it could kill your shot. So I'm just gonna go ahead and save as, and we'll keep going. So for the bricks, or sorry, the concrete rather, it's a bit of a complex setup. So hold on here. But for our concrete texture, we just went to CG textures and we got a concrete texture, of course. So what we did was we actually took the texture we took, which was concrete new 0001, if you want to look that up, and we took it into a Crazy Bump, which is a quite popular program. You can get a free trial if you want to try it out. crazybump.com, and what it'll do is it'll generate different maps for you based off a single image. So you can see, like, this looks like it's made out of really bumpy stones, but in fact it would have been generated from a single diffuse image of rocks, and then it would spit out specular maps, normal maps, bump maps, all that good stuff, and then you can throw that in your materials to really make them look good. So you get a lot more power and a lot more flexibility out of a single image with programs such as Crazy Bump than you would with just the image themselves. And so if you want to give that a go, by all means. So we hope you guys have fun playing with that. So what we did was we took our concrete, and you can see we have 5 images generated out of it. So we have the diffuse map, which you can change the suffix to, but it defaults to color map. Displacement map, which would be your bump map, normal map, which we might not use. We're testing it out, and the results from the displacement / bump map provided just as good a result, if not better, than the normal map did in this circumstance. Likewise for the bricks. So we probably will leave that out for this time. But all that does is Blender extrapolates the color data, and it tells it which way the face is facing. So you can actually have, the illusion that there is 3D things popping out of the surface where there actually isn't. It's similar to a bump map, but it just shows, or it dictates how the light is hitting the surface as opposed to the quality of the surface, if that makes sense. But yes. And then we also have an occlusion map, so that would just be like where light is occluded within the texture, crevices, etc. And then we have a specular map, so that'll be picking out the shinier versus the more diffuse areas. All right, so we have those. And so we'll just move that back out of our way. So we're gonna need 4 image textures to build this. We're going to be using the color map, the displacement map, the occlusion map, and the specular map to achieve such a result. So to do that, we're going to first add an input attribute node, and that'll just let us pick the, if we go back over here to our object data tab, you can see that we have the different UV maps for our objects. We'll need to put in the name of the specific one we want to use. So in this case, this one's called concrete, so we'll type concrete in here. Right, so we have that. And then we want to go ahead and add an image texture. And we'll hit Shift D to duplicate it. And we'll just duplicate it 4 times. Or rather 3 times, so we have 4 in total. And then we will hook up the vector from the attribute into the vector of each of the images. and that'll just relay the UV coordinates from concrete to all these images. And a handy little thing, if you guys, if you start getting like all these strings together and you don't like how complex it looks, if you hold Shift and then drag with your mouse to cut, it'll create another node for which all those can join from, and you can just add more from that point. If you want to move it around, just hit G like you would any other object in Blender, so that's quite handy. And it just keeps your interface looking a little bit nicer, especially once it starts getting a little bit hectic. So I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so you guys can see what's going on. So we have our 4 image textures here in our attribute node. So these are each going to play or be a different map of the texture. So we're going to go ahead and load up into the top one here. We're just going to go ahead and add the specular map. And you'll see why we're doing it in this order. Not really a specific order, I suppose. If you want to, you could throw them in willy-nilly and just have them going whichever way you want. But this just is a setup I found flowed nicest. So then the next one we'll choose the color map or diffuse map. The next one will be our occlusion map. And then finally our displacement map. And we'll save. And save as. Alrighty. So, at first, well, right now these aren't going to be applied because they're not plugged into the output over here. Let's go back to solid. And we'll save some of the surprise for in a bit. But we'll just get this started. So what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to move our diffuse node over here. Same with our output, just so we can see what we're doing. And we're going to plug the color map. I believe that's this one. Yeah. If you drag them out, you can see the file name, or with the node selected in the property panel over here. If it's hidden, just hit N. You can change the label of the node, so you can type in color map, and then the name will update over here on the top of the node. So if you want to do that, go ahead. I'm just going to reference the file names on the node. So we're going to feed the color map into the color of the diffuse. That makes sense, I'm sure. We're going to add a color mix RGB, and we're going to add that on top of this string we added here. And we're going to mix in the occlusion map into the bottom, and we're going to change it to multiply. So I suppose we can take a look at what that's going to be doing now. If we go to rendered, you can see we actually have our texture, not necessarily looking all that great, but we have it there. And if we just play with the factor of the multiply here for the occlusion, you can see that we're adding in, or multiplying on top of that, the shading from the actual occlusion map. So, we don't need very much here for the concrete, seeing as how it's, there's not going to be those extreme dents in it. But if you had a more textured surface with crevices in there, that would definitely play a part. So we have that in there. And then next, we are going to go ahead and add a mix shader, and we'll drop that after the diffuse shader. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to create the, give it some glossiness, so it looks a little bit shiny, which is always nice. So we're going to go and add another shader and a glossy shader. We'll just drop that under here and connect it into the bottom. And you can see we've already got this nice mirror finish. But that's obviously not what we want. So this is where the specular map comes in handy. So I'll just bring that back out again. So this is what the specular map looks like. Where it's white is where it'll look more specular, or it'll reflect more, and where it's black it will look more diffuse or not reflect. So we're going to use that to our advantage to mix the glossy and the diffuse textures here. So we're going to go ahead and, if we were just going to plug that straight into the mix shader, your results aren't going to look too nice necessarily. You're going to have areas of 100% glossy, and actually I'll put the roughness just so you can see exactly what I mean. You'll have areas of 100% rough, or diffuse rather, and 100% glossy, which just doesn't look realistic at all. So to remedy that, we're going to add a converter color ramp and put that between the image texture and the mix shader. And then what this will do, or rather what it'll let us do, is if we select the white end over here and we choose the color swatch here, if we dumb down the value of the white, it'll remap all the values of the images, or rather the image we put into it, so that white, the maximum value, becomes this gray color, and then all the values will adjust as such. So if we just, take a look, you can see it's not 100% glossy anymore. We have this area where you still get the reflections, but you still see the texture underneath. So that is what we are achieving there. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the roughness up to about a 0.1, and you're not going to notice it right now. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is add a point lamp in the scene. So lamp, point lamp, and we'll just move it up so that it's near the roof. Okay, and move it right down. And we'll go back to rendered viewport just so you can see what you're doing. And if we come around here, there we are. This is what I'm talking about right there. You'll get the reflections that you'd expect with concrete at that steep angle, but you're not going to get, it's not going to be that 100% reflection that it was getting before. So, if that's still too reflective for you, you can always dumb down this gray value. So that's that. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and add a converter math node, plug the color of our displacement map into it, change the mode to multiply, and plug that into the displacement of our material output. And then what this lets us do is control the amount of bump mapping it actually receives from that texture. 0.5 is way too much. I think we found a value of about 0.02 suffices. So you're not going to actually see anything right here. But what we did after we have this in place now, all these nodes set up, is we can go about rescaling this texture so it actually fits the scene, because right now this looks kind of humongous. So I'm just going to hit ZZ to go back into solid, tab into edit mode. And with our materials here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I don't have anything selected over here. Go to our concrete texture and then hit select, and it'll select all of the concrete areas in our scene. Okay. And then what we can do is come over here to our UV map. Make sure we go to our concrete UV map in our object data tab so we actually get the coordinates we had before. And if we scale it up, it will like if we say this square was our image we're sourcing, the bigger the the UV layout is, the smaller our image is on the layout, and the more it'll tile. So be mindful of that if you don't want it to tile very much. But if we tab out of edit mode now and go to rendered viewport, you can see that we have a more dense texture, and you can scale that as much or as little as you want. And if you don't like that it's getting this grid appearance, because it does have edges, you can always I find a good cheat is just to rotate your UV layout 45 degrees, and that'll kind of hide some of those lines slightly, very slightly. Like it's still pretty cheap, but you got to do what you got to do some days. So there's that. And you can scale that differently if you want. But for now, that looks about done. And from the render, you're not even gonna really see that if we have our building perspective here. But it's the principle. If it's on there, you should texture it. and so that looks good. The only thing we'll have to do also is with these escape hatches, or fire escapes rather, we'll have to scale those as well. So if we just tab into them, go to the concrete texture, and scale up a bit, those will scale as well. And because they're linked objects, they'll all have grabbed that transformation. So we'll just let that go for a second. Yeah, it looks alright. And maybe make it a bit smaller. Sure. Alrighty. So there's that. So now we're going to do the bricks, and the bricks are similar setup. So we're going to go to this, choose brick, and you know, like I said, concrete and the brick are similar, but this one we'll actually have to scale the bricks carefully so that we get a proper looking brick. So we're going to go ahead again, choose attribute, add a texture, image texture, duplicate that 3 times so we have 4, feed that in to all of these. Make sure we choose the proper attribute UV layout. So for the bricks, it's called bricks. And so that'll grab those coordinates. Now we'll go ahead and open, and we did the same thing to the bricks as we did with the concrete in Crazy Bump. So we have you know, these different maps. So we have the color map. Sorry, the first one we choose is Specular, at least for this setup. Specular, color, occlusion, and finally displacement. Alright, so we got that. And if you wanted to, you could just copy and paste the nodes from the concrete, just replace the image textures, and just tweak a couple settings. But yeah, we're going to do this properly, just so you can see it again, in case you know, it's a little bit foggy in your head and you're too lazy to rewind. You know, we all have those days. Just going to go ahead and save. Add a, we're going to move our diffuse here. Add a color mix RGB node. Change it to multiply. Feed our color map into the top, occlusion into the bottom. So that way it'll multiply the occlusion map on top. And if we come in here and put the multiply node into the diffuse, you can get a sense of what we got here. And you know, that kind of looks cute, like a little building model. You know, if you were going for that novelty look, yeah, you probably could be done right here. But anyways, we're gonna keep going. So we're just gonna go ahead and play with this. You know, yeah, you can see, you know, the occlusion stands out a lot, but we don't need that much. This just help fake shadows a little bit. So we're gonna go about we could probably do 0.5 and get away with it. It's a subtle effect, to say the least. So yes, so we have that. We're gonna go ahead and add a shader mix shader. Drop that after the diffuse shader. Put our specular map into the factor, and then add a shader, glossy shader. Feed that into the bottom of the mix shader. And then if we move our point lamp, if I just grab it, and we put it beside the building, kind of get a sense of what we're doing here. You can see that's really, really shiny, which we don't really want. So, and the reason why it is so shiny is because when we exported the color maps out of Crazy Bump, you see we have these areas of, you know, pure specularity and no specularity, which is just overblowing that. So to remap those values, we're going to go ahead and add a converter, color ramp. Take the white value, drop it to a gray, something. And you can see it's, you know, a little more acceptable. You could even drop that a bit lower if you wanted it to be not so intense. Our light's really bright, so that might be throwing you off. if you have your scene lit already, that might help you decide the amount of specularity you want. But we are doing that in the next step. So anyways, guesswork. So we have this. And you know, you can tweak that if you want, but you see it's got a nice reflectivity to it. I think that looks, yeah, about right. You know, you want to reference things when you can. You can't really judge it right now either because it doesn't have any bump mapping, and that really affects how the reflections go. So we won't worry about it too much right now. We have it set up. Yes, we have that. So we're going to add a converter math node, change that to multiply, feed the color of our bump map into the top, and feed the value into the displacement of the material output, and then that'll let us have bump mapping. And let's see here. And if we move our lamp, I'm just gonna go to solid so I can see what I'm doing. It's easier to see on one of these larger faces. So we'll go to rendered again, and if we we'll put our bump rate to 1, you can kind of see the effect, maybe. Let's see here. If we have the lamp, let's see. If we go to the point lamp settings and we change the size to, you know, from a 0.1 to like 0, that'll effectively have 100% hard shadow. The larger this number, the softer the light for the lamp settings. So if you want your shadows to like fade away, like if you were to hold your hand above a table and as you move your hand further away from the table, your shadow gets more fuzzy around the edges. It's a similar thing to that. If you have your size rated 0, your shadows will stay 100% crisp the whole way. If you have it non-zero, eventually your shadows will grow fuzzy on the edges, which is pretty realistic if you've paying attention to life and the real world. So we have the bump map, and 1 seems to be sufficing for now. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. Or yeah, let's see. Let's move the lamp right close up to the building, and we can see what we're doing a bit better. Rendered. Cool. Alrighty. So we're not getting the exact effect we're going to get. When we scale it, the bump map will have a little more effect. So we'll probably have to scale it from there. But in due time. So I believe that is it for the brick texture. And if you wanted to ever recolor your bricks right in Blender, you know, you didn't want to go into your editing software of choice, you could just drop something right in here in front of the diffuse, like on this diffuse texture, or after the occlusion map if you wanted. So just to demonstrate, you could go ahead and add a color, RGB curves. We'll drop that in right there. Make some room. And, you know, if you wanted to, you can make them a little more red by boosting the red. If you pull out some of the blue, you make it slightly orange. You know, do some on-the-fly color changes right there and have it suit your fancy. So we have that. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and scale the bricks so that they are, you know, proper. So we're going to go ahead with an arbitrary scale, which is that each of these floors is about 10 feet. So we'll say, you know, each brick is about, yeah, on the high end, 6 inches. So we'll have 20 bricks per flight, or level, I suppose. So to do that, we'll just tab into edit mode on our building. Make sure we go to the bricks UV map. I'm just going to go to solid for a second. We're going to go to our material tab, click on brick, and then hit select. That'll just select all the faces that are bricks. And then we'll be able to select them over here and scale them up. Probably go pretty far. And if we tab back out and go to rendered, you can see, oh, we have bricks. And actually, I probably got it, pretty close on the first try. Not bad. Yeah, so you just want to take a look, and I think this is where we judge the scale when we did ours, was near the space door. If the bricks look in scale with the door, you did it right. You know about how high the door is in your head, and you know how high a brick is in your head compared to the door. So when it starts looking natural down here, it should look pretty good for the rest of the building. So when you zoom out, you won't really see all the individual bricks, but the noise in the texture will be realistic enough that you'll think, oh, those are bricks. And that is how we do our job here. Fooling you with illusion. So we have that. And even though we didn't unwrap this windowsill, because they end up just repeating the single pixel across, it actually doesn't look too horrible. You still get those grooves in the brick, which looks pretty fancy and legitimate. So thank you, accidents. But like I said, such a minor detail, you probably won't even notice it, or at least you shouldn't, because it'll be fractions of a pixel in detail, so there's no point. Save yourself some work where you can. That's one of the important things to remember. But if you were having some detailed shots, you would maybe consider unwrapping those areas if you wanted to get away with just the simple method of using the single pixel that gets repeated right across the face. That's up to you. But it still gets the bump mapping, so you still get the depressed grooves and stuff like that. So it could work to your whimsy. But we have that. So I'm just gonna save again. And so lastly, we're gonna do our windows. So this will get a little bit intense, and not necessarily. Let's see here. I'm just gonna go to orthographic here. Check out our fire escapes here. They look, yeah, we have to rescale those as well. So I'm just gonna grab one, tap into edit mode, make sure we're on the brick UV map. Make sure we don't have any faces selected over here. Just grab the brick. And then because the bricks were too big over here, we're gonna have to scale this up so that it samples more of the image, hence making it smaller on the model. So we're gonna grab these, scale it up, and we'll tab out edit mode, go back to rendered, and we'll see if we got it close. And that looks, yeah, it could probably be a little bit smaller, but I'm gonna call it good for now, just to save some time. Go back to perspective with 5 under number pad. Save as. Alright, so now on to the windows. So we have our glass material here, and now this is going to be a bit of a different setup from what we have here. I'm going to show you how to set up the nodes in such a way that you can actually animate it if you wanted to, or it would be animatable for time-lapsing between day and night. So basically you'll be able to control the lights inside, as it were, or how bright the windows are. Complicated sounding, maybe. Complicated to do, yes, ish. But let us venture forth, peoples. So I'm just gonna make some room in our node editor here, because this will get a little bit intense. So we're gonna go ahead and, like we have before, add an attribute node, and just to make sure we're spelling it correctly, it's called Windows. Put that in there, so now that'll grab the proper coordinates. We'll go ahead and add a texture, image texture, and we need 4, because we made 4 maps in the last tutorial. So 4 as well. There we are. Link those all up. Alrighty, so we have that, and so let's go ahead and load up our textures here. So we're gonna go to our textures, windows. So we're gonna need a diffuse up here. Yeah, somewhere. We can sort them later. Up front, we'll need a emission map, which we'll be using in a different part of the material, where we set up the controls to switch between day and night. We also need a glossy map, and then finally our bump map. So we have that, and so this is where it gets a bit intense. So if it gets a little bit complicated, I apologize ahead of time, but this is how this will be going for now. So we're gonna go ahead and add a emission shader, and we're gonna put that up here with our emission texture, and we're actually not gonna feed it in because then it'll just be emitting the emission map. And let me just remind you what those look like. So these were our different maps here. So this is our bump map. This was our diffuse map. This is our emission map. So if we were to go to feed this into our emission texture, it would be emitting this image, which doesn't look right at all. Like, it doesn't look like windows. What we need that texture for is to control the emission amount for this texture. So we'll be using the diffuse as the texture for the emission map, or for the emission shader, but we'll be using the emission map to factor in how much the emission shader actually has influence in the scene. If you followed that, excellent. So we're going to go ahead and feed our diffuse texture into the emission map there. And we're also going to add a shader, glossy shader, and we're just going to build this bottom part now. We'll go back to the emission later. But we need a glossy for, the obvious fact that they're windows. So we have glossy there. We also need a diffuse shader. The diffuse is actually the main component of the window, and we just use a glossy to make it glass-like. So we're going to feed the diffuse texture into the diffuse shader, and then we're also going to add a mix shader. And actually, what am I doing here? I'm being redundant. Get rid of that. Mix shader right there, and we'll mix the diffuse and the glossy, and we'll just put that into the end so you can see what you're doing. Oh, look at that, we have windows. Now, right now, they look like they're really dirty or foggy, but if you're doing a location in a foggy, misty city, reduce the roughness, or rather increase the roughness on your glossy for the reflections, and you'll get a nice misted effect. But for this, we're going to keep it at about a 0.01, and you'll see that it blurs out the background image here. So if you're using a low resolution environment map, that will come to your aid, and it'll make it look like it's not as low resolution as it actually is. But that might be a little bit too fuzzy for you, so I think we ended up using a 0.02 or 0.002. Yeah, that sounds correct. And that'll just very slightly blur out the elements, so kind of like a depth field kind of thing. So the building will be in focus, but the stuff it's reflecting is further away virtually, so it ends up being not in focus. So we have that, and yeah, it's looking a little bit too glossy, right? So this is where the glossy map comes in handy. So we have our glossy texture here. We're just going to go ahead, and this is, I apologize, where it starts to get a little bit hectic. And I guess, no, yeah, we'll keep it like that. We'll add a converter color ramp right up here. We'll feed our glossy shader in, or sorry, our glossy texture into it, and then we'll feed that from the color ramp into the mix shader. And so what that'll let us do is control how glossy this is, and remap some of those pure white values to a gray. So you can see here, once we knock it down, it starts to look a little bit more realistic because you can still see what's behind the glass, while you still get those reflections in front. And you know, if it's if you want a little bit more privacy, I guess, just bump up the reflections a bit, until you get something that you like. And there we have that. We're going to add the bump mapping now. So we're going to add a converter math node, put the color of bump map into the top of that, feed it into the displacement of the material output, switch the function to multiply, and if we just zoom in right here onto one of these bars, you can see that we're getting this bulging around the bar. It's really subtle, but it picks up the lighting, and even from far distances you can tell that those areas jump out a bit. So that's, you know, a really nice detail if you want it. So we have that, and what we're going to do now is build the emission part of this. So you can actually use, you know, a small amount of lighting in the daytime, so that your windows, you know, look like they're actually still being used, like they probably are. But we'll do it in such a way as it'll be subtle enough so that it still looks like it's, you know, not so prominent, and that it is actually day, and that you guys aren't using like 10,000 watt bulbs in your buildings. So up here we're going to need another glossy node, or rather, yeah, a glossy shader. So we'll just put that below our emission shader we have up here, and it's going to use no texture, but we're also going to need a mix shader. So we'll do that, and we'll mix our emission into the top and our glossy into the bottom. And if we just slice off what we have down here and feed that into the surface, you can see, oh, now we have a you know, a lovely emissive window. So it's, you know, if we put this right to 0, so it's being 100% emissive, you can see that it's emitting that as the diffuses, which is not what we want. But just like we did with the glossy shader before, down here, we're going to go ahead and change the roughness to 0.002, and likewise change that as you wish for your own devices. So we have that, and we're going to mix the take the same glossy factor that we had down here and feed it into up here. So they're using the consistently between the day texture and the night texture, they're the same level of gloss. So you have that, and likewise, this is why I said I'm sorry if it starts getting a little bit complicated. I'm trying to keep it as visually flowing as possible, and I think we're almost done, so it shouldn't be too bad. The rest of the stuff will end up over here, so I think you can riddle out most of this middle stuff. So we still haven't used our emission map here, but we're going to now, and it's going to be in a bit of a lackluster way, or anticlimactic, I suppose, after all this stuff. But we're going to add another mix shader, and we're just going to mix the two mix shaders, if that isn't redundant. So we have, you know, our day down here being mixed with our night up here, or rather, I guess our lights versus our not lights, if I can say that. But currently they're just being mixed by a value that we choose. So, you know, 1, which is completely day, or 0, which is completely night. So we'll just leave it at 0.5 for now. But we're going to go ahead and add our emission map into that. And so now it'll be, you can see here, our emission map is, well, it's not doing exactly what we want. We'll have to invert the colors here. You can see our emission map here is mixing the two values, but not anything like we want. It's glowing around the edges where we'll want it more like a vignette, so it's glowing in the center. So to fix that, we're going to go ahead and add a converter math node. Change that to multiply, and so that should flip-flop those. Yeah, so now you see we have a well, similar kind of thing. Oh, I know what we have to do. We have to switch the order of the mix shader, so we have the day fed into the top and the night fed into the bottom. There we go. And then this multiply will be what we actually use to switch between the two. So 1 is 100% night, and 0 is 100% not lights. Yeah, not lights. So, you know, we have that. But if you want to control it a little bit better, or a little more easier and user-friendly, go to input, add a value, and that'll just be like a scalar vector, or sorry, a scalar quantity that you can just input. So it's essentially just the same thing that's down here, but up here. And what you can do is if we go to the property panel over here and choose color, we can actually give that a color. So I'll just do, you know, 100% saturation, make it red, and that way you know that's the one you want to affect for changing it up. So we'll just label that day-night factor, and so now it has that name. And this you can actually animate. So if you were going to have a time lapse, or if you wanted your lights to just turn on, you could hit I, and it would add a keyframe. Go forward in time, hit I again, and that inserts a keyframe. You know, change your value, insert the keyframe, and you're good to go. So you want to stay between values of 0 and 1, otherwise you'll start getting, you know, it being more emissive than it ever was. So if we jack that right up to 100, you can see it blows out the window because it's, well, it's factoring, or rather, yeah, it factors it by a factor of 100. So everything gets multiplied by 100, and yeah. So stick to zeros and ones, somewhere in there. And so we get that. So you're like, oh, you know, the lights are on, I can't really tell. Let's make this night. Oh, I'm magic. We'll go to our world tab, we'll turn the strength down on our environment map here, and you can see, ooh, we have lit windows. And actually an interesting quality of our emission map is that, yeah, the vignettes aren't, you know, exactly perfect, but it adds a cool effect. It looks like there's objects occluding light in the room that you can't see because, you know, they're behind things that are there, if that makes sense. You know, like there's a shadow that's being cast against the window, so you can't see everything. And you could actually use this to your advantage. You could put people, like silhouettes in there, and you can animate them if you wanted an animatable texture, or like a movie texture. So instead of, you know, your emission map being an image texture, you could change it from a single image to an image sequence or a movie, and you know, you can have people walking across, and you could do that, and that would just change the emission map. So you wouldn't even have to change the diffuse color, you know, if you wanted. For the ones where you can actually see in the room, you probably would. But these ones that are just curtains, yeah, you could get away with just the emission map, and then that would just cast a shadow across. So, you know, quite flexible if you wanted to do it that way. So with that, we have our completed building. Let's just put that back up to daytime. Change this back to a sun. Yeah. Whoa, that's really bright. Yeah, whatever. So we have our building here, and you know, it's looking pretty good. If you guys wanted to give that a render, by all means, and you could, you know, jazz this up however you want, put different accessories, and you know, just make it your own. But that's it for part 4. So in part 5, we're going to be showing you how to kind of lazily, in a way, match up the angle for a scene that it would be showcased in the background. So we'll be doing some, you know, we can just demonstrate it here quickly. You know, you just move it into place, render it, composite it. Oh, look, we have another building in this city. It's crazy. So yeah, this preview is similar to what we'll be doing in part 5 and 6. So part 5 will just be setting up the render, using environment maps, and doing the lighting. And then part 6 will be actually compositing it in After Effects onto a video plate. So in no time, you guys will be able to start adding things into your scenes. So I hope you guys learned a lot and that you picked up some handy tips for, you know, materials in general. You know, if you have any questions, drop us a line. Reminder that Blender 2.68 just came out, so go ahead and download that at blender.org. There's some handy stuff in there that you guys should really check out. And yeah, support the cause, guys. So for Tech Tyro, this is Keith Morgan, signing off.